Mark and Sandra entered the bustling restaurant, looking around the room expectantly, eager to reunite with their families for a long-awaited dinner. As they entered, they noticed Paul and Lucy, Sandra's children, sitting in a quiet and secluded booth with Lizzie, Mark's daughter. Assuming that their spouses must have been out for a while, or were late, they approached the table with smiles, unaware of the unexpected conversation that awaited them. Mark smoothly slid into the booth, pulled out a chair and made himself comfortable. Sandra followed suit, her eyes briefly scanning their surroundings before joining him. Unfazed by the unusual circumstances, they took their seats, ready to enjoy the joyful evening together, completely unaware of the shocking revelation that was about to occur. Mark pulled out a chair and plopped down into the booth, greeting the group with a cheerful, "Hello, kids!" Sandra, looking around the restaurant, followed suit and pulled out her own chair before asking, "Where are Jim and Sarah?" Paul intervened, explaining, "We asked them to give us some time alone with you." Sandra's smile grew wider. "Any important news? I think we should be flattered that you wanted to tell us first." Lizzie replied with a serious expression. "I think it was more because we wanted to share some things that we had learned." Mark, noticing the change in tone, asked worriedly, "You all speak so seriously. What's happening? Everything is fine?" His gaze shifted to his daughter. Lizzie was silent. Lucy, seemingly unfazed by the seriousness of the conversation, said to Sandra, her mother, "Pineapple fudge." Sandra felt a lump in her throat, leaving her speechless for a moment. The face paled, becoming like a ghostly sheet as she tried to make sense of the unfolding conversation. Mark, completely confused by the sudden turn of events, responded with a puzzled expression and confusion evident in his voice. "Pineapple fudge? What are you talking about?" Lizzie, taking the opportunity to shed light on the situation, turned to her father with a leading question. "Good question, Dad. Sandra, do you want to explain to him?" Here Lucy, Sandra's daughter, intervened again, adding a touch of sarcasm to her words. "Yes, Mom. Would you like to explain to my biological father what pineapple fudge means?" Sandra, struggling with the shock of being faced with such a revelation, muttered, trying to collect her thoughts. Waiting. How are you? Where did you hear about pineapple fudge?" Paul, keeping a straight face, intervened, shedding light with a hint of accusation in his voice. "From your diaries, of course. Where do you write everything down, right? This is your secret code for, 'Today I had sex with a man who is not my husband, but is considered his best friend,' isn't it?" His gaze shifted from his mother to Mark and back, his eyes reflecting indignation, not particularly hidden in his voice. Lucy, feeling the weight of this revelation, expressed a bittersweet feeling. "I always wanted to have an older sister." As she spoke, she quietly squeezed Paul's hand, which she held under the table. Her gaze moved to Lizzie, and she added with genuine tenderness, "And I knew and loved Lizzie all my life," also gently squeezing Lizzie's hand. But then her tone changed, filled with contempt, as she turned her attention to Mark. "But it's still a little shocking to hear that we have the same biological father." The weight of her words hung in the air, emphasizing the deep sense of betrayal and resentment she felt towards Mark and Sandra, whose actions had destroyed the foundation and trust of both families. Paul, with a mixture of annoyance and disappointment in his voice, told Mark the truth that had finally come out. "Did you really think that we would never know?" In the world of DNA testing, genetic diseases, and ancestry research, it is clear that sooner or later this will come to light. Mark paused, realizing the weight of Paul's words, before becoming defensive. "Look, guys, we're very sorry that you had to find out about this, but it shouldn't change anything. Lucy, Paul, I'm still the same Uncle Mark you've known all your life." His attempt to reassure them seemed weak in the face of shattered trust. Continuing his explanations, Mark pleaded, "Jim and Sarah don't need to know about this. This will only harm them and will not bring any benefit. In his quest to protect the stability of his life, Mark failed to perceive the profound impact that this revelation had already had on their family dynamics. Jim's voice cut through the tension, hitting Mark and Sandra as they realized their missing partners had approached the table, undetected. "It's a little late for that, old friend. You are about 3 months late." Jim pulled out a chair and sat down. The weight of his words hung thick in the air, emphasizing the depth of betrayal. Sarah joined them at the table, her face showing anger and disappointment. "Besides, Jim found out first and told me before we jointly decided to tell the kids." She sat up, her movements filled with pent-up rage, her voice simmering with anger as she addressed Sandra directly, Sarah's words laced with sharp causticity. "And now, after our weekend with Jim, I really don't think no benefit is a good enough assessment." She grinned at Sandra. Sarah's face was a mixture of indignation and mockery. "Sandra, I can't understand what was going on in your unfortunate head. Have you traded your Michelin-starred chocolate ganache for a stale, dried-out piece of pineapple fudge? I'm glad the kids insisted on extra time because I could barely walk here from our hotel room." Mark's shock quickly turned to anger as he realized the truth. His voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and indignation. "Wait, you and Jim? Are you having an affair?" Lucy, although angry, could not help but laugh bitterly at the irony of Mark's reaction. "Are you really upset about this? Aren't you being too hypocritical?" There was slight sarcasm in her words, emphasizing double standards. Sandra, who was gradually regaining her composure, intervened in a calm but decisive tone. Wait. If you two were together, then we're even. Jim, you got your revenge." She met the accusing glances of her children and husband. "Now we have to figure out how to move forward and work on rebuilding both of our families." There was a glimmer of determination in her eyes as she took on the role of leader. Sandra's voice grew stronger as she continued, determination guiding her words. "This shouldn't change anything. Mark and I will end our affair, and you will both end yours. We can all get through this." There was a conviction in those words, as if she was determined to forge a path to healing and restoration in the face of broken trust. Jim's eyes flashed with a mixture of shock and intense anger as he listened to Sandra's attempt to level the playing field. His voice dripped with bitterness as he replied, "Well, that may seem fair to some, my dear. It would be so if it weren't completely idiotic." He paused, his anger simmering. The words poured out into a stream of pain from betrayal. "You've been having an affair with this sack of shit for 20 years. You conceived a child together and told me that he was mine. All this time, Sarah and I were friends, close friends, but we never did anything inappropriate. How the hell does that make us equal?" Sandra's confusion was evident when she replied, "Sarah just said that you spent the weekend together." Sarah's mocking tone cut through the air as she retorted, "We did it, and it was magical. Honey, it turns out that, at our age, not all guys suck so much." She grinned, clearly enjoying the opportunity to tease her husband. Lucy chimed in playfully, interjecting, "Mom!" If Sandra had been in a more stable frame of mind, she would have noticed that her daughter called the other woman Mom, but in her confusion she did not notice it. She'll figure it out soon enough. Jim's voice grew firmer as he continued, a hint of triumph in his words. "But you're wrong, Sandra. We never had an affair. Because by the time I touched Sarah intimately for the first time, we had both already filed official divorce papers. You were too busy on your weekend business trip for us to bother serving you, but..." He raised his hand, pointing to the man standing at the door. The atmosphere became tense. The unknown man reacted to Jim's gesture and approached the table. He wasted no time in conveying his message in a cool and formal voice. "Sandra Davis, Mark Willis, you've been served." He handed each of them a brown manila envelope, the contents of which were no secret. The man then stepped back, taking out his camera to capture the moment before nodding to Jim and walking away, leaving the culprits dazed and confused. The table fell silent as Mark and Sandra exchanged glances, frantically trying to comprehend the sudden turn of events. The weight of these envelopes completely changed their lives. adding another layer of uncertainty to a turbulent situation. Sandra's composure shook, her voice trembled with despair, and tears streamed down her face. "I don't want a divorce. This is not the way it should have happened. Mark and I don't like each other. That didn't mean anything. I love you, Jim. I have always loved only you." Her words filled with pain, she begged her husband, hoping to save their broken relationship. Sandra looked from Jim to Lucy and Paul, her children, her voice breaking with emotion. "Lucy, Polly, tell your father that this shouldn't destroy our family." Her prayers were addressed to the children in the hope that they would help bridge the gap between their parents. Mark, who sat silently, seemed completely broken, his face reflecting the enormous pain he was experiencing. He seemed lost, unable to find the right words to express the depth of his remorse and regret. In a silent act of solidarity and support, Jim, Sarah, Paul, Lucy, and Lizzie placed their hands on the table, intertwining their fingers. Their united display underscored their commitment to each other, acknowledging the challenges ahead and giving each other the strength and support needed to face the future. Jim's stern voice carried through the room, drawing attention and signaling that it was time for Sandra to listen. The weight of the decision made by all five was obvious. "Sandra, I think it's time for you to shut up and listen. The five of us have been discussing how to proceed for a month now. We've got all our ducks in a row, and as far as I'm concerned, none of this is subject to revision." Lizzie intervened in a decisive tone, confirming the unity of their decision. "We thought long and hard about it separately, and then we leaned on each other to decide how to proceed. We are unanimous on this." She glanced at Paul and Lucy, appreciating their collective efforts. "I'll just add that the three of us came up with this, and your spouses initially tried to dissuade us." Paul, speaking with a sense of maturity and determination, emphasized the gravity of the situation. "My little sister may be the youngest at the table, but she's an adult now and has a wise head on her shoulders. She was directly affected by this, so we asked her to tell you how things will unfold." Lucy, sniffling but gathering her strength, spoke with a mixture of pain and determination. "In short, it is so." She turned to Mark, her voice firm and unyielding. "Mark, you provided your seed, but you never were and never will be my father." Her gaze returned to Sandra, her expression hardening. "Sandra, you have been my mother all my life. Not as good a mother as my father was, but still my mother. Well, it ends tonight. From now on, you and I have no relationship. I don't want to talk to you, read your messages, or have any contact at all. This may change in the future, but I wouldn't bet on it. If this happens, it will be my decision. I'm sure you're against it, but I want none of you to ever contact me again. I can assure you that I will not respond." Paul, looking at his broken and almost catatonic mother, shared Lucy's feelings. "The same applies to me." Lizzie, determined and adamant, added her voice. "And to me too." Sarah, calmly but firmly, touched on the practical aspect of their decision. "Jim and I have a common lawyer, whose details are indicated in the envelopes you are holding in your hands. All contacts must now be made only through a lawyer." There was an awkward silence at the table as the weight of what had been said dawned on everyone. The path forward had been charted, and the consequences of their choices would undoubtedly change their lives. Jim, after a significant pause, allowed the silence to deepen, giving Sandra and Mark time to realize the gravity of what had been revealed. Breaking the silence, he moved on to the next question. "All 8 grandparents were informed about this today." He turned his gaze to Sandra. "Your parents," he nodded, "and yours," pointing to Mark, "didn't do anything wrong, and we don't want to erase them from the lives of their grandchildren." His words conveyed concern and attentiveness, as he always respected and loved his relatives. Jim continued, emphasizing all the conditions. "However, their continued participation depends on whether they accept this situation. They must not pass on any messages from you to the children and will not give you updates on any aspect of our lives." He made it clear that the boundaries he set for Sandra and Mark also applied to their parents. While they may maintain a relationship with you, this should in no way interfere with us or affect our family dynamics. Mark, your mom and dad are really excited to get to know their new granddaughter, and we will definitely support Lucy in getting to know them. At the same time, it is not surprising that this does not change anything for my parents. They love Lucy more than anything in the world, and nothing will ever change that. The once unified family structure has been forever changed, and the new boundaries will change the relationship not only between Sandra, Mark, and the children, but also between their parents and grandchildren. Sarah entered. We're not leaving. This is not New York or Los Angeles. We may run into each other in a restaurant or on the street. Her tone was filled with anger, a sense of warning, and a clear boundary. With palpable restraint, Sarah continued, determination evident in her voice. I would strongly advise both of you to pretend that you don't know me. It took all my self-control not to spank you both here tonight. The depth of her anger was obvious, and it was clear that maintaining composure in future confrontations might prove difficult. Then Lizzie's voice took on a more positive, albeit forced tone, and it was her turn. But in a way, Sandra, you were right. Her words hung in the air, attracting the attention of everyone at the table. A noticeable shift occurred when Lizzie addressed Aunt Sandra, abandoning her usual term of endearment and simply calling her Sandra. It was a subtle but significant sign of strained relations. She paused briefly before delivering the unexpected news, her tone still laced with a mixture of emotions. I want to share good news. Actually, two good news. Paul and I are getting married, and it will happen soon, because in about 7 months your first grandchild will join us. There was a moment of joy in Sandra's eyes when she heard the news, but the weight of the previous discussion quickly cooled her. Likewise, the hopeful expression on Mark's face faltered as he realized the complex implications of the current situation. Paul, pushing aside any positivity, spoke bluntly, his voice filled with a mixture of disappointment and determination. Lizzie and I talked about how your betrayal affected our relationship. It's weird as hell that we now share a half-sister, but at the end of the day, we were inseparable from the very first day we met at playgroup. There was a hint of bitterness in his words, but also a determined refusal to allow their parents' actions to destroy the bond between the children. While it will always be overshadowed by the fact that it was where you first met, there is no reason to let your terrible behavior ruin our relationship. Lizzie continued. The child appeared unexpectedly, and it happened earlier than we had originally planned. But we always wanted to have children. There was a sincerity in her words, reflecting a deep desire for stability and love in the midst of chaos. Her voice grew stronger. Our parents, the two that remain, are very supportive of our decision to start a family now. Lizzie highlighted the support they received from Jim and Sarah, who were by their side during this crucial moment. Their parents' unwavering support provided a glimmer of hope amidst all the turmoil, a reminder that there were still foundations of love and caring to rely on. But no matter what you may think about how things will change in the future, know this, Paul stated in an unwavering tone. You will not attend our wedding. You will not be present at the birth of your first grandchild, or any subsequent ones. You won't spoil them, play with them, or babysit them to give us a day off. His words painted a picture of severe restrictions. He looked at Sandra, a mixture of emotions showing on his face, before continuing. You won't get their photos, hear their first words, or catch them when they fall. The weight of these words was palpable, illustrating the deep loss both sides would feel. He looked at Jim, and gratitude and respect flashed in his eyes. Mom? He turned to Sarah, trying a new way of addressing her for the first time. The barely noticeable change in address carried a deep meaning, signaling a change in their relationship. Paul's voice softened as he realized the burden that would now fall on Jim and Sarah. Mom and Dad will have to take on the burden of being the only grandparents. Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Sarah couldn't help but smile at the thought of becoming a grandmother and at the fact that Paul called her Mom. Having dealt the final blow, Paul turned to Mark, "Mark, you won't take Lizzie to the altar. That honor will go to Dad. Frankly, you've already given up your right to give it away." There was a strong determination in Jim's voice as he raised the issue of making these changes widely known. "Sarah and I didn't do anything wrong, and therefore we do not intend to hide the reasons for the breakdown of our marriages from friends and acquaintances," Lucy continued, barely audible. "I want people to know. I want people to know why I completely cut you out of my life, Mom, so you can be judged harshly and not me." Her desire for others to understand the gravity of the decision reflected her need for approval and appreciation. "I don't want you at my graduation next month. Yes, this is a public event, and I cannot prevent you from attending." Lucy's voice grew stronger, containing a mixture of determination and concern for her reputation. "But I've earned the respect of my teachers and my friends' parents, and I don't want to lose that by spitting on you if you show up." Lizzie chimed in with a wry smile, bringing a touch of humor to the tense atmosphere. "Unless, of course, before that, Sandra, your mother hasn't decorated you yet." There was a hint in her words that if Mark and Sandra did not listen to what was said, the consequences could be serious and physical. All five rose from their seats, leaving Sandra and Mark alone with their destroyed world. "And lastly," Jim began decisively, his gaze focused on his cheating ex-spouses, "I had a loving friendship with Sarah for 20 years. It won't take much effort to turn this into a loving relationship." He pointed to Sarah, acknowledging the depth of their connection. "I've already fallen in love with her, just because of her support over the past 3 months." He looked straight at Sandra and Mark. "Betrayal won't break me, and I won't let it break Sarah." There was a decisive challenge in his words, a refusal to give in to the pain he was causing. "You may have been laughing at us behind our backs for the last 20 years, but for the next 50 I'll be laughing with Sarah." He emphasized the joy and happiness that awaited him and Sarah, free from the burden of a broken relationship. Turning to Sarah, Jim softened his tone. "Sarah, I fell in love with you. It's too early to expect you to feel the same, but I want you to give me a chance." There was a plea in his words, a request for patience, and the opportunity to build something new. "And when you do that," Jim continued, his voice growing stronger, "I want us to commit our future to each other before God and our children." Our partners, it seems, did not take their vows seriously, but we did not change them, and you can be sure that our attitude to our future vows will be just as deep and heartfelt. When Jim first spoke to Sarah, it was quite possible that it was too early for Sarah to experience the same deep feelings for him that he had for her. But looking at her tear-stained smile, it was obvious to anyone that by this time she already felt the same way. Jim and Sarah hugged each other and followed their 3 children out, united and ready to forge a new path together, driven by love and determination to find happiness among the ruins. Sandra and Mark were left to deal with the consequences of their actions. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.